Why am I calling this video spiritual money? Well, it's because money currently is created in such a fashion that literally all of mankind, if you don't live entirely on your own in the jungle or something, you are a slave. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. Doesn't matter what your situation in life is. You are a slave. Now, there are numerous people who have done the research. You can Google and find it everywhere on the internet about ideas and theories, and you'll see people with PhDs in finance that will tell you that money is made this way or that way, or they have the Federal Reserve and money is created into existence by the Federal Reserve and this and that and everything else. And then you'll find people that could be labeled as crackpots or whatever. They're generally ignored by the mainstream people because they don't really have any concrete facts to back up what they claim. For instance, they'll say that the Rothschilds, along with several other families in the world, create all the money and we're slaves to them. But that's only partially true. Here's the thing. The Bible has a little bit of information referring to certain words that Jesus said, which deals with money. Things like render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, when he was talked about money. And in other instances, he talked about how the rich man can never enter into the kingdom of God because blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. There's really no clear indication from what Jesus said exactly what he was talking about. But he did know what he was talking about. It's just that there was no way for him to educate the people what exactly was going on. He just kind of said a few things and it would cause people to think. But you're never going to discover the source of money because that is so extremely well hidden. People with PhDs that teach economics, professors at universities, etc., even they don't know. I mean, they claim to know, and they will go through the process, and they have brainwashed themselves into believing they know how money is created because this is what they have been taught. And but it all leads to a cognitive dissonance to be able to make sense of it all. But I'm not going to go into that other than to just lightly touch the surface, because there's no point in me doing that because other people have done a very good job of that already. Like I said, you can watch YouTube videos, you can do all kinds of research and find all kinds of which would seemingly be crazy about Rothschilds and this and that and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? You're only scratching the surface. You're really not getting to the core of how money is made. And as I said, you're never going to. And as such, you're just going to stay brainwashed into thinking that what is currently the process is appropriate. It's okay. It's the way things should be. But it isn't. And the reason I said spiritual money is because, spiritually speaking, there's zero possibility that the planet Earth on a large scale could ever hope to become spiritual when you are under the oppression of being a slave. So the story in the Bible talks about how the Israelites were slaves and that Moses drug them out of slavery and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's the same thing. In other words, why did they want to leave being slaves? Why did they want that? And at least they were aware that they were slaves. Currently, mankind doesn't realize that they are slaves. And that's why the world is filled with wars and hatred and, the list goes on and on and on. Any religion you look at anywhere is practicing cognitive dissonance, for crying out loud, because they talk about the love of God, this, that, and everything else. And yet at the same time, it's just a horrible situation with, priests having their sexual way with little boys and girls and all of this kind of stuff. And, that's the stuff that you know about from news. But the real news doesn't get out, which is vastly more horrible and sinister than elderly priests molesting little children. I mean, it's way worse than that, to the point where it's satanic and everything. But anyways, so as I said, you're never going to find this source of money. And this has been happening ever since the beginning of this dispensation. And when I say this dispensation, I'm talking about for approximately 10,000 years. I know the Bible people think that the world is only 6,000 years old, blah, blah, blah. And that's because they're taking something that's meant to be analogous and applying it to a concrete reality, which isn't true in any way, shape, or form. The Hindu teachings are more in line with reality in that they recognize yugas. So there are 4 different yugas, and I'm not going to name them, but we're in the Kali Yuga right now. And again, they misunderstand the time frames, so they'll apply hundreds of thousands of years to each yuga, when in fact it isn't. It's more along the lines of approximately 10 to 12,000 years. And Jesus referred to the God of this world as being Lucifer, and that's true. It's absolutely true. And so how does the god Lucifer have control over this world? Well, it certainly isn't in the form of a supernatural power, so to say, more so than it is money. And so the creation of money is in the hands of Lucifer, essentially. So the easy way to understand money is to understand how it should be created. And once you understand how it should be created, then you'll understand that the way it is currently being created is deleterious to mankind. It creates a slave system. And the leaders, or as it goes up the line in power and authority, they're more and more evil. And that's how they're rewarded with the money. Since the source of all money is being created through the hands of Lucifer, so to say, or not even so to say, it is. The money is funneled or directed to evil people. It's never going to be directed to non-evil people for the most part. So consequently, when the power and authority always rests in the hands of people that have the money, because the people with the money can manipulate political systems, governments and everything. Governments, for the most part, the people in government are just as delusional or ignorant of what reality is as most other people are. They don't know what the heck's going on for the most part. And so how is money supposed to be created? I'll tell you. And this is extremely important, although I doubt that anyone is going to take me serious because they think I don't know what I'm talking about. That's okay, but at least I have to put the truth out there. And I'm telling you that this is the way money is supposed to be created. But using an example that is DNA, for instance, the DNA in human beings has been so corrupted over the past 10, 12,000 years that we're incapable of conceiving of how money is even supposed to be created. So now, am I saying that that is a true reality? No, I don't know for sure why people can't understand how money's created, but I'm using the story of DNA because it kind of makes sense in that people have been so indoctrinated for millennia that they don't even conceive of how money's supposed to be created. And when somebody comes up with, like myself, that tells you how money's supposed to be created, you'll instantly default to, oh, that person's got their head up their fanny or something like this. They don't know what they're talking about because people with PhDs know how money's supposed to be created. Well, I'm telling you, the PhDs in the universities, again, are following under the slave system. They issue PhDs at universities and college based upon who is following the dictates of the Luciferian system. Not what is right and what is true. No, not at all. And that's the same way in churches too, and religions and everything else. This is why people like Buddha could not become enlightened by following a simple, or not simple, but a organized, systematic line of learning and everything. He threw it all to the wind and gave up. And Jesus is in the same boat. I mean, nobody can find out how Jesus became enlightened and understands everything because he didn't follow an organized path. You can't go to a university, get PhDs and everything else and think that you're going to be enlightened and think that you're going to understand the things of God. It's never going to happen because the whole system is evil and corrupt based upon the slave trade of how money is made. And the only way mankind is going to exit this this Kali Yuga is if they actually change the way money is created, and that's how you could exit evil, so to say. Another way for that to change is eventually things happen like end of world type events. Now, I don't mean world, but end of humanity type events. And these events happen approximately every 10, 12,000 years or whatever. And, you know, I mean, they got stories of Noah and the ark, and they've got the days of Sodom and Gomorrah where the place was all burned to hell. And then you got the stories of Adam and Eve where they were kicked out of the garden. All of these stories are just stories indicating a change of how mankind was destroyed so that it can start all over again because it got to the point of total evil. We may very well be at that current situation right now with mankind. And maybe this virus thing is part of it. I don't know. But anyways, so with no further ado, money should be created civilly, not civilly, but by a government. So let's say I live in the United States. So it could be any country. It should actually be created by, I mean, the whole planet could be a single country, but you can't force that upon the people. The people have to actually desire it and want it in each country. So for instance, let's say where I live, the United States starts creating money correctly. Well, then other countries of the world would petition the United States and say, hey, look, we would like to be part of your country and be part of your money system. Can we join your system? Rather than forcing it down people's throat. Does that make sense? I mean, there's no way you can force this kind of thing. The sun is coming out. It's a cloudy day today, and that's why this is blinding me. Anyways, so yeah, the governments create the money. Right now we have it 180 degrees out of sync. It's like, here's positive sign of electricity and here's the negative. And if you reverse them, you see, that's the same thing with how money is created. Right now, it's totally 100% backwards. For instance, you got to raise taxes and everything to pay your government bills, so to say. Like if you have a military, you have to raise enough taxes to pay for that military. If your government fixes roads in your area, well, you got to raise enough taxes to pay for the road repairs. If you have government people that are mayors and politicians and all this kind of stuff, you have to raise enough taxes to pay for those politicians. And of course, that list you can kind of extrapolate and understand what I'm talking about. Well, that's 180% opposite of the way it's supposed to be. For instance, the way it's supposed to be, if money were created properly, is the government, meaning when I say the government, get it in your head correctly. The government is an organized system of people, humanity. If there's 1 million people or 1 billion people, or it doesn't matter how many people decide to organize, that is a government. Government is an inanimate object of thought. It's just thought. A government system is a group of people representing the people. That's what it is, okay? So when the government of the people, for the people, decides to, let's say, have a military, okay? You don't raise taxes to pay for the military. That's backwards. That's assuming that your military is a cost of doing business, when that's not true. The military is an asset. You see what I'm saying? It's like a chunk of gold. It's an asset. So the more your military is, the more you have to create money to pay them. And you're not creating the money. What you're doing is you're allocating the money into existence because they need money to exist, and it's an asset. So when you build roads, you have to create the money to pay for the roads. You don't raise taxes to pay for the roads because that's asinine. That is backwards. You just simply print the money into existence to pay for the roads. And you're not creating the money out of thin air because the roads actually exist. That's called an asset. It's something that is tangible. It's real, okay? And so you're creating the money to match the asset, rather than creating the money out of debt and then giving it to someone. For instance, and you can extrapolate that. So for instance, right now we have a backward system. So if you had a correct social system, then let's say healthcare, for instance, that's a good one. People shouldn't have to pay for healthcare because that's a social system. It doesn't cost money. Do you understand? Your healthcare system doesn't cost money. It creates money because when it's a social system, You create the money to match the asset. And you don't underpay for anything. That would be like cutting off your nose to spite your face. Why would you pay yourself less money than what you're worth? You'd have to be a fool. So if you have doctors that have to go to school for several years and dedicate a good portion of their life to doing that, and you want to attract them because it's like a capitalistic system, you want to attract them to being doctors, and so you reward them appropriately and you pay them appropriately. Same thing holds true with road builders and politicians and you can name it. Every utility like your gas and water and why not gasoline for your vehicles? Everything that you can conceive of that helps society. For instance, let's say the schooling system. Why would you want to have colleges be an expense that people can't afford? That's the dumbest ass thing. That's, again, cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's just absolutely ignoramus to charge money to go to school. People should go to school if they want to go to school at zero cost. And when I say zero cost, I mean the cost of their dormitories and everything are free. The cost of the food should be free. They should be able to focus 100% of their attention on schooling so that they can be great doctors, lawyers, engineers, whatever. I mean, that is going to benefit society. Therefore, it isn't a cost, it's an asset. So, right along with that, you have capitalism in its truest sense, not in the corrupt system that we have now, but capitalism. For instance, you got automobiles and you've got cameras like which I'm using right now. And you've got clothing and you've got jewelry and you've got everything you can conceive of that isn't absolutely necessary to survive or to flourish your country. If it's a necessary thing for your country to flourish, then that needs to be a government system. Right now, over the past 50 years, most of the things that used to be government were given to big corporations and everything because it's the system of slavery and it's the system that rewards the most evil people. So you have capitalism alongside this system. Capitalism creates fancy automobiles and everything, and they charge whatever they want to charge. It doesn't matter what they charge because you don't need that damn car. You can buy a different car. Does that make sense? So they can charge whatever they want to charge, and if they go bankrupt, it's because nobody wants to buy their product because they're charging too much. And if they're charging too much, somebody else will build it at a better price, and that person will stay in business, and that person will go bankrupt. That's the way capitalism is supposed to work. If a person can build a better airline system, then they will stay in business, and that person will go out of business. But probably what we have is wrong again, because airlines, trains, transportation should not be owned by corporations. So in all likelihood, there should probably be, the airline system should be owned by the government, meaning the people. Again, it's an asset, and it's a necessary way that we need to move about from here to there and everywhere. You can have a private airline company that is owned by a corporation, but it would compete with the government, and there's nothing wrong with that. Some people don't want to fly in a great big airplane. Maybe they want to fly in a private jet with only 10 people, and the corporations can do a better job of that. So they're not really competing with the government. The stock market is another thing. That should not exist because that's this form of gambling essentially, but it's not even that. It's a way to funnel money into the pockets of the evil, greedy people. The stock market shouldn't exist. Banks shouldn't exist other than banks that are owned by the government. No bank should exist other than if it wants to exist. And if it does exist, it cannot charge interest. Interest rates cannot be above zero. So if you want to loan money, that's fine. You can charge a handling fee if you want, but you're not going to be able to compete because the government will loan it for free. Does that make sense? So let's say you have a great idea. It's no different than the current banking system. Whereas, let's say you have a great idea, you've done your homework, this, that, and everything else, you want to invent this, you want to borrow $50 million to get this thing off the floor. Well, you go through the same exact type scenario, whereas you go to the bank, you present your case, you have your proofs and everything else, then you get the loan for $50 million. The only difference is there's zero interest on the cost of borrowing that $50 million. You have to pay it back, but you don't have to pay interest on it. And in fact, there's no loan fees either. It's just, here's $50 million, you have to pay it back. If you don't pay it back, the government, meaning the people, takes your business and your company. And for instance, if the business is a necessary thing, then we don't destroy the business and fire all the people that are, it's just incorporated into the government system, and those people now are employees of the government, which is the people. Taxes, the IRS. Taxes would only exist as a means to keep the money flowing. For instance, if you get taxed, a corporation, a business, or whatever. First off, corporations would pay zero taxes. Everybody would pay zero taxes unless you have you're using that money to, shall I say, corrupt things and everything. You can figure that out in the details. But taxes are taken in by the IRS. Let's say they get $1 trillion in taxes. Well, they take that $1 trillion and they zero it out. They don't use it to pay for things because you don't need to pay for things with taxes. Taxes are zeroed out into zero. It just doesn't exist anymore because money is now created the proper way. It's created through that system. Now, if you think that is stupid and everything, let me explain just a itty bitty, teeny weeny little aspect. So, the current system that we have now is, let's say you have 10 people. Now you can extrapolate that into 7 billion people, but let's just say you have 10 people under the current system. And you have a $100. That's how much circulates between the 10 people, $100. And each person has $10. 10 people, $10, $100. That's what you have right now. One of the people decides to go out and he digs in the ground and he finds a bunch of gold. So he takes that gold. Now the gold has no value. It's just gold. But he wants to make more than the $100, the $10 that he has. Well, he has to get some of the money from somebody else so that he has more money. And they say, well, that pound of gold is now worth whatever it is, but that the $100 doesn't grow. There's no more money in the system. You don't just create money on the basis that he dug gold out of the ground. I'm telling you the way it currently is right now. So that gold, let's say, has a value of $10. Okay, so now he has $20. But everybody else lost $1, or actually a little more than that. So everyone else has, let's say, $9 instead of $10, so that he can have $20. So the gold has no intrinsic value, so to say, based on money, because it has to fluctuate to do that. That's the current system we have right now. And that's why, for instance, a person A person wants to buy a home for $100,000. Ha ha ha, as though you could buy a home for $100,000. So let's say you want to buy a home and it's $1 million. Well, you go to the bank and get $1 million, and then the bank creates that money based upon the debt. So the great portion of that money is created, so to say, out of thin air and given to the person so that they can give it back to the bank over the course of the next 30 years. And when it's all said and done, you have your house paid for free and clear, and you paid $100,000 with all the interest. It comes to, say, $350,000. But the reality is that money was created out of thin air, and you paid an exorbitant amount of money for that. You shouldn't have had to go it that way. I'm not going to go into the details, but you can figure that stuff out. You're not stupid. But if it were created correctly, you go to the government and you borrow $100,000 and you pay it back over the course of 30 years or 10 years or 5. Who cares how long you pay it back? But the grand total will never exceed $100,000. And you pay it back to the government. That's how the money, or the money that you create, not you don't create, but you create the work by buying a home. And that employs tons and tons of people to produce all the products. And you pay it back to the government. And when you pay that $100,000 back to the government, it's like taxes. It's zeroed out. Because the government creates money to pay for government services. For instance, the employees at the bank, they make money based upon whatever their wages are. And their wages are created into existence every Friday when they need to get paid. Anyways, if you did it that way, then money would never, ever, 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 ever fall into the hands of evil people. Does that make sense? Because right now, it all falls into the hands of evil people. So you have drug dealers, for instance, and we can think, oh, these are bad people. Well, drug dealers would have money. Okay, well, if it were created electronically, for instance, and created into existence electronically, well, there's a line of where that money comes from and where it's going and everything else. And that would cease to exist if the money were created by the government. And you can't compete with the government, because if you compete with the government, you go to jail, as well it should be. Because again, the government is the people. It's you and me. It isn't this evil cartel or anything, as the way it is currently right now. I've written extensively on this. So if anyone's interested, let me know and I will forward this to you. But I'm here to tell you, currently, there's zero possibility that the world can exit this Kali Yuga and get into a system where love prevails and intelligence prevails, etc., etc. There's zero possibility, because the source of power and authority is the way money is created, and that's created through a Luciferian system that is hidden so extremely well that you're never going to find the source. So, yeah, I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that I hope this makes sense to you. Again, this is one of those things that is crystal clear in my head. And I didn't think of this on my own, by the way. Well, I mean, there's nobody else in the world that has it. But I mean, it's one of those things where I have thought about it for the better part of 20 years. And, it's like enlightenment. God blessed me with it. And now I don't know what to do with it other than tell other people. And if you can understand what I'm saying, and if it makes sense to you, then maybe somebody or a group of somebodies can implement this throughout the world, and that would be wonderful. But I'm just one person. I'm a retired firefighter that has spent my life studying spirituality, and that's not my job to run the world and everything. That's somebody else's job. There are other smarter people that can understand that sort of stuff. Like maybe Senator Rand Paul could do something like this. He's always had these kind of thoughts on his mind. His dad is in the same boat, always had these kind of thoughts. Seems like a good person. Maybe there's other people that have power and authority that could change the world. But it's not me. It's not my job. It's not what I want to do. I love God and I love spirituality and I love doing what I do. So, anyways, I hope this makes sense to you, and I hope the world would change. That'd be awesome. Anyways, have a good day. Bye.